Okay, so in this lecture I want to start talking about argument structure. And we're going to say a lot about argument structure. In fact, you know, honestly that might be, if we're going to say what is this class about, that might not be a bad way to sum it up, right? Logic is about the structure of arguments. And look, looking at the structure of argument is part of what we do to evaluate an argument. As Lavin says, there are really two different ways we can evaluate an argument. And both of these have to go together, right? We can look at the structure of the argument. Do the premises support the conclusion at all? If they do, how much support do they provide? How strong is that support? You know, Lavin gives some examples of arguments where the premise might provide a little support, or the premises they don't provide that strong a support. Second question, are the premises true? Or relatedly, even if we think they're true, even if we firmly believe they're true, how confident are we that they're true? Now look, logic proper is concerned with the structure of arguments. If you take an upper level logic class, they might not talk about, the premises being true at all. We're going to focus mostly on the structure, but I think, you can't separate this entirely from what are and aren't good premises. So we'll spend a little bit of time on true premises, or at least coming up with good premises. But mostly, even at a logic class of this level, we're going to focus more on the structure of arguments. Well, but how do we study an argument structure? How do we determine what that structure even is? How do we determine how the premises support the conclusion and how well? Well, there's a lot of different techniques. You can go more or less in depth with this. But a relatively easy first step, and also a kind of first step you're going to want to do even if you're applying more advanced techniques, more in-depth stuff, is just to figure out what you think are premises and what you think the conclusion is, and to sort of put them in an ordered list with the premises in some kind of sensible order and the conclusion at the very end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, however many premises you think there are, then the conclusion at the very end. Now look, when you do this, you can't just take a block of text, number every sentence, and throw it on the page, right? You're going to have to decide what is and isn't part of the argument. And a lot of a written passage, I think you guys have already seen this when we're talking about rhetoric, but even, the apple bomb I gave you is not a very good argument. It's mostly rhetoric. But even with good arguments, a lot of the passage won't be argument, right? There will be other stuff going on. When we talk or we write, we do different things. Some of what we put in a written piece might be explanation. Some of it might be pure rhetoric. We might also, in fact, we commonly do, repeat ourselves, right? And this isn't always bad writing or bad speaking. Sometimes in a very long piece, we will repeat ourselves to remind the reader or the listener of what's going on, right? And, for the time being, the passages I'm going to show you guys will be pretty short, but do keep in mind when you're figuring out the premises in longer pieces, and we will see this, some of the sentences might be repetitive. They might just be making the same claim again or restating it, reminding the reader. In that case, you don't list it as a premise twice, you just list it once, right? We'll talk more about that as we go along, as we get to longer passages. Let me give you a short passage, and we'll do what I'm talking about to it, and you guys can see how this works. So let's take this passage. I say, if I'm honest, I suppose part of the reason I believe in God was that I was raised as a believer, and people tend to adopt whatever religious beliefs they were raised with. But I also think there's too much order in the world for there to not to be a creator. There also needs to be some explanation for why the world exists, and God is the best explanation. The idea that the world exists for no reason is just weird, and I can't believe anyone really accepts that. So some of this is argument and some of it's not, right? If you were going through this on a written page, you were trying to figure this out, it might not be a bad idea to strike through or underline. Underline what's an argument, strike through what's not. I've just highlighted what's not an argument in blue and what is an argument or part of the argument in red, right? If I'm honest, I suppose part of the reason I believe in God is that I was raised to be a believer. People tend to adopt whatever religious beliefs they were raised with. That is not an argument, right? I am not giving you or anybody else any reason to think God exists. I'm explaining part of the reason I think he exists, right? People pick up the religious belief of their parents. That's probably part of the reason I believe in God. That's part of the explanation here, right? The very end here, the idea that the world exists for no reason is just weird, and I can't believe anyone really accepts that. That's just rhetoric, right? First and the last part, if you were putting this on a written page, just strike through, right? This middle stuff here, but I also think that there's too much order in the world for there not to be a creator. There needs to be some explanation for why the world exists and God is the best explanation. That is an argument. You might or might not buy that. You might or might not think it's a good argument, but it is an argument. I am now giving you reasons to believe this claim is true, right? Now, look, now that I've stripped out everything that's not argument, I know what my premises are. God exists. Is our conclusion. I don't state this quite as clearly in the passage as I probably should, but, that's what I'm trying to get you to conclude. Premise 1, there's too much order in the world for there not to be a creator. Premise 2, there needs to be an explanation of why the world exists in the first place. This is not a great argument. We'll talk about missing premises next week. Boy, does this have a bunch. Good argument, not a good argument. It at least is an argument, right? One more example. I really struggle to see why anyone could oppose society providing basic health care to people. To me, it's clear that if we can save another person from dying or severe injury at minimal cost to ourselves, we should do so. If every person chips in, the taxes we pay to provide basic health care are not that much. So by providing health care, we can prevent people from dying at minimal cost. Therefore, society should provide basic health care to people. Anyone who says otherwise must be some sort of miser or hasn't really thought about the issue carefully. This is a more complicated argument. There's a lot more going on here. But I think it should hopefully be clear to you guys what's argument and what is not, right? I really struggle to see why anyone could oppose society providing free healthcare or providing healthcare to everyone. Rhetoric, right? Anyone who says otherwise must be some sort of miser or really hasn't thought about the issue carefully. Again, rhetoric. The red stuff here is the argument. Conclusion is this, therefore society should provide basic health care to people, right? We can go through, put these premises in some kind of order. If we can save another person from dying or severe injury at minimal cost to ourselves, we should do so. Providing everyone with health care will prevent death and severe injury. Providing everyone with health care will not cost each individual very much. So by providing everyone with health care, we can prevent people from dying at minimal cost. Therefore, society should provide everyone with health care. Now this is a more complex structure. We'll come back to this. And in this first one, it doesn't really matter. You can put 2 could have been 1, 1 could have been 2. It doesn't matter what order the premises are in. If you're numbering the premises in this one, the structure is a bit more complex. It actually does matter. 4 should be where 4 is, because 2 and 3 are actually supporting 4. This is what we call a sub-argument. We'll talk a lot more about it. For the time being, you guys don't need to worry about this. Just notice the structure here is a bit more complex. But the important thing is, this exercise of, okay, we strip out everything here that isn't argument in both of these and leave what is. That is a good first step. Then second step, put it in numbered premises with the conclusion at the very end. All right, so this is all pretty simple stuff. Next lecture, we'll get more deeply into argument structure. We'll start talking about something really important, and that is argument mapping or argument diagramming. Actually, lecture after next, we'll talk about that. Next lecture, we're going to take a brief detour and talk a bit about deductive and inductive arguments. Not going to say a lot, but I think this distinction is important to have up front, so at least I will introduce it, because Lavin does too, and I think it's worth having this in our pocket as we go forward. This is, a tool we can work with. All right. So next lecture, actually next couple lectures, they'll be short, brief detour into deductive and inductive arguments. Then we will finish up with talking about diagramming arguments or argument mapping. Some people might distinguish these two. I'm going to use the terms argument mapping, argument diagramming pretty much interchangeably. I'll mostly talk about diagramming arguments. And diagramming arguments, which we'll start to do this week, will tell us a lot more about argument structure. We'll get to see how the premises support the conclusion and even how the premises relate to each other. They'll also tell us how much the premises how much the conclusion depends on each individual premise. So this will give us some tools to start to see a lot more, not just what the structure of an argument is, but to see, is this a good argument or not?